Good afternoon. My name is Lucas Anderson, and today I'll be doing my presentation for History 1120, Monsters in History. Today's presentation will be on the Beast of Lake Tahoe, also known as Tahoe Tessi. So Tahoe Tessi has three different distinct kind of phases in her life cycle in popular culture. She's got the early phase, she's got a mid phase, and then she's got the modern phase. There's distinct differences between her kind of perception and how she's represented in each of these phases, so we'll be going through each of them chronologically. But first, in order to understand Tessi, we need to understand what the Lake Tahoe actually is. It's a very unique environmental kind of region because it is such a high mountain lake, but also extremely deep. The water levels fluctuate a lot in summer and spring because of all of the snowmelt. They get a huge amount of snow. They have very extreme winters. Northern Lake Tahoe is most famous for its Donner Pass. The environmental features and how harsh they are have contributed a lot to kind of superstitions about the lake. Because the lake is so large, you can often find different weather patterns on different ends of the lake. It'll be very common for you to be standing on the south shore looking at the north shore where there is huge storms going on and you're sitting on a sunny beach. It's very temperate in summer and very nice, but in winters is extremely harsh and extremely difficult living. That being said, there have been people existing in the Tahoe Basin for quite a long time. Our archaeological records date back as far to 1,500 years ago with the Washoe tribe. Not a lot is known about them pre-settler, but we do have a lot of information post-settler. In 1840, we got the first wave of settlers going through this area of California, trying to reach the west coast and also trying to get to a lot of the gold mines that were happening and opening up in California. The Washoe tribe themselves have a lot of superstitions and legends about Lake Tahoe. They were a fishing tribe. They were primarily focused in and around the lake itself. So they have a very close and deep connection to the lake. That being said, once the settlers moved in, they were not violently kicked out, but hostilely kicked out. Because of this, they have lost a lot of their kind of identity and a lot of these kind of traditional stories and traditional beliefs about the lake because of this separation from it. There have been a lot of recent kind of developments as far as legal reparations for the tribes and trying to reclaim a lot of ritual sites in southern Lake Tahoe in particular. The tribe itself was located primarily in southern Lake Tahoe. It's much more livable than northern Lake Tahoe. You can see different kind of evidences still even to this day, both in preserved sites and just kind of out in Lake Tahoe naturally. But in 1840, we got our first kind of settlers coming into the region. Now, the first wave wasn't really settling as much as they were traveling through. It was seen as inhospitable, uninhabitable. It was very harsh, not a place you wanted to settle down. In the 1850s, though, they realized that their temperate summer climates allowed for a perfect vacation destination. And so the Tallac historical sites and the Rollins station became the two prominent areas on the southern shore. The Tallac historical site was it was essentially like a resort casino kind of area that was separate from any other kind of civilization. It was more of a vacation destination. It's the equivalent to our today Bahamas, where the rich elite go to unwind and relax. It had brothels, it had casinos, it had pretty much everything that you wouldn't find in quote-unquote civilized society. The Roland Station was a bit different. Lake Tahoe is very widely known for its forestry and specifically its logging. But there's a lot of issues with the logging in Lake Tahoe, and that's mainly because it's such a high mountainous lake. It's difficult to get that lumber off of it, especially because all of the water from the runoff either goes into the Mojave to the east in Nevada, into the lake itself, or fans out across into the floodplains of California and a lot of the agriculture area. So you don't get a lot of kind of the similar widespread logging that you would expect in this high forest area. And the Roland Station primarily ended up being more logging for areas and developments around the lake. Now, not much happens as far as Tessi up until 1890s. 1890s is the first written down reported sighting of Tahoe Tessi. It was published in the San Francisco Call. The sighting itself actually dates back to 1865, but the person, the witness, Coggins, he was recounting it back in the 90s. He basically describes how him and this dog are off kind of on a hunting trip, and they are spotting this humongous lumbering serpent that just moves through the forest and then disappears into the lake. There are some other reported sightings before this, but this is the first official published one. Some of those other reported sightings can also be dated back to the Washoe tribes and their belief in water spirits that reside within the lake. Again, we don't know much about them because of the hostilities in which they were forced off of their land, but this Coggins report in the San Francisco Call is our number one kind of primary source for the original. We'll go back to this. So after the Coggins report, there tends to kind of be a lot of sensationalized kind of news about it. There is a lot of sightings, there's a lot of very bad photography taken, there's a lot of blurry kind of stuff going on. It's the same, very similar situation to the Loch Ness Monster right around the image, like the kind of proliferation of photography. The difference is that Tessi never gained widespread appeal or kind of notoriety that the Loch Ness Monster did, despite having very similar kind of identities. Some even going as far to say that Tessi was a ripoff of the Loch Ness Monster. The issue with this is that not a lot of the photos have been digitized. There is still a lot of photographic evidence that is being stored in museums, but there's no real desire or need to digitize a lot of those photos, and so they're very difficult to access unless you actually go to the Tallac Historical Sites or the South Shore Museum. But in the mid-1900s, we see a huge shift in kind of the Lake Tahoe culture. It's becoming less and less of this kind of like elite, socialite kind of hangout place, and becoming much more of a family trip kind of place. With that brings a lot of pollution, and it brings a lot of littering. So in the 1950s, the Keep Tahoe Blue initiative began to find its roots. Part of this Keep Tahoe Blue initiative is the Keep Tahoe Clean initiative. Keep Tahoe Blue was an anti-pollution, Keep Tahoe Clean was an anti-littering. They needed a good mascot and some good iconography for this kind of image to be like, look, we are real. And so they chose Tahoe Tessi. This is the first reported of her name that I could find. It's very possible that there are some kind of like, in that weird in-between early 1900s where there's a lot of like images and kind of scattering of news reports that she could have been named. But the Keep Tahoe Clean kind of initiative was the first widespread use of her name. She proceeded to be a kind of environmentalist kind of icon and symbol for quite a long time. When they wanted to push for more family kind of vacationing and more kind of like changing of that image, Tessi became widely known as a children's mascot, specifically a mascot for the actual lake itself, as like a parents come see the lake, kids come see Tessi. This is where we start to see a lot more of kind of like personality added to Tessi. She becomes more of this kind of like fun, almost like Barney, educational, Smokey Bear kind of figure. A lot more personality. You also see a bit more feminization with the symbol, like the symbolism of Tessi. It becomes more widely thought of as Tessi being feminine in nature. There isn't much going on through the 90s and early 2000s. It's pretty much the same kind of momentum picking up and continuing of both the, mainly with the children's and like capitalistic kind of ideas behind Tessi. You start to see a little bit of that environmentalness kind of wear down. specifically around the 2000s when you kind of see this kind of anti-environmental kind of sentiment kind of taking root. But that leads into the modern era. There have been a couple recent major developments when it comes to talking about Lake Tahoe Tessi. One for the good and one for the bad. One is kind of carrying on this kind of like capitalization of Tessi, and we see that with the Tahoe Night Monsters. Nevada has recently gotten a hockey team this past October, so just a couple months ago, and they have decided that because they are based around the Lake Tahoe area, they wanted to claim Tessi as their kind of mascot for the team. A couple weird notes about it is they defeminized Tessi. They give this mascot a much more masculine appearance and even refer to their mascot in a lot of their kind of ads and their kind of information as using masculine pronouns. So it's kind of also a weird little shift in Tessi's image there. The other place where we see it that is also kind of a bummer is the rise in conspiracy theories, especially around AI. There is a lot of AI imagery about Tessi pretending to be old imagery, which is also why it's extremely difficult to find more of those kind of old historical pictures that you would want to look at from the early 1900s. You're getting a lot of AI imagery, a lot of conspiracy sites saying that there's stuff in Lake Tahoe, there's mob grave sites, there's an elephant buried there, there's Tahoe Tessi. AI also has made it extremely prevalent to blur what Tessi actually looks like, even more so than the commercialization of Tessi did. You get a lot of weird images, and it becomes harder and harder to find any kind of relevant information. Tessi is an extremely interesting figure, and there's a lot to be said and looked into with her, but unfortunately, as time goes on and as her popularity becomes less and less actualized and more commercialized, we are going to have a harder and harder time finding information about her. There's also this kind of weird shift in her image to make her more tough and more kind of intimidating and more scary. There's also some questions to be said about what is happening with the Loch Ness Monster around these same shifts to see if it is similar with both or if one is kind of moving in different directions as the Loch Ness Monster. But overall, Tahoe Tessi is an extremely historical figure, both when in the historical context of the wider Great Lake Tahoe area and in the sense of showing the different trends within California's social and political kind of climates, with first being a traditional native icon or spirit into the superstitious kind of aspect of the early settlers, into the environmental kind of symbol and icon of the 1950s, into the modern kind of commercialization and conspiracy angles of Lake Tahoe. Overall, Lake Tahoe and Tessi represent a very unique aspect in American kind of culture and specifically monster culture that doesn't often get looked at. And I think that there's a lot more to be said and looked into as far as both research and kind of looking more into why those kinds of shifts have happened.